Daniel had always been good at picking gifts. He knew Lisa liked practical things, something she could actually use in her day-to-day life. That's why, on their 8th wedding anniversary, he chose an Apple Watch. "Happy anniversary, babe," he said, handing her the small, neatly wrapped box. Lisa's eyes lit up as she pulled off the ribbon and lifted the lid. "Oh my God, Danny, this is amazing." She quickly took it out, securing the sleek device around her wrist. "Now I have no excuse to skip my workouts." Daniel chuckled. "That was the idea. Plus, it syncs with your phone, so we can stay connected even when you're busy." At that moment, he was just a loving husband, giving his wife a thoughtful gift. He had no idea that he had just handed her the very thing that would unravel their entire marriage. Weeks passed, and the watch became an extension of Lisa's arm. She used it to track her steps, read messages, and monitor her workouts. Daniel didn't think much of it, until the night everything changed. Lisa was in the shower when a notification popped up on her Apple Watch, which was charging on the nightstand. Daniel wasn't the snooping type, but something about the message caught his eye. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." His stomach dropped. The message was signed with just an initial J. He stared at it, his hands cold, his breath shallow. A million thoughts raced through his mind. Who was Jay? Was this a misunderstanding? A harmless message from a friend? Before he could think of a rational explanation, the screen dimmed, the message disappearing as if it had never been there at all. Lisa stepped out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her body. "Hey, what are we watching tonight?" she asked, her voice light and normal, completely unaware that the world as Daniel knew it had just shifted. He forced a smile. "Anything you want." But inside, something had cracked. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling. That message wasn't innocent. It wasn't normal. He needed answers, but he knew confronting Lisa right away wouldn't get him the truth. The Apple Watch synced with her phone. His anniversary gift had unknowingly given him access to everything. That night, while Lisa slept soundly beside him, Daniel grabbed his phone and scrolled through their shared Apple ecosystem. His heart pounded as he pulled up her activity logs. Midnight workout logs, but not at home. The GPS data showed locations he didn't recognize. Spikes in her heart rate at 3 a.m. Messages sent during meetings that should have been all business. Then he found the phone number. His blood ran cold. He knew that number. It wasn't just anyone. It was someone close. And just like that, Daniel's heartbreak turned into something else. Something darker. He wasn't just going to find out the truth. He was going to make sure they paid for it. Daniel barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, the message on Lisa's watch flashed in his mind. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." The words played on repeat, each syllable slicing through him like a blade. By morning, he had a plan. He wasn't going to confront Lisa yet. If she had been lying to him, she would only lie again. He needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence. He spent the day at work in a daze, his mind consumed with thoughts of Lisa and Jay. Every time his phone buzzed, his pulse quickened, hoping for a new clue. By lunch, he had already checked the shared Apple account 3 times, searching for anything new. Then, just before he left the office, he saw it. A new workout log. The location wasn't the gym she usually went to. It wasn't anywhere familiar. It was across town near a hotel. Daniel's fingers tightened around his phone. She had told him she had a late meeting. He took a deep breath, pushing down the anger rising in his chest. If this was what he thought it was, he needed to be smart. If he rushed in, she'd have time to cover her tracks. Instead, he opened the Find My app. Lisa's location popped up. She was still there. Daniel grabbed his car keys and walked out of his office without saying a word. He parked a block away from the hotel, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The last thing he wanted was to do something reckless. But as he sat there, watching the entrance, his stomach churned. Then he saw her. Lisa walked out, her hair slightly messy, adjusting her coat as if she had thrown it on in a hurry. Her Apple Watch glowed on her wrist as she pulled out her phone and typed something quickly. Seconds later, Daniel's own phone buzzed. "Hey babe, just finished up. Grabbing coffee before I head home. See you soon. Love you." His breath caught in his throat. The lie came so easily, so effortlessly. A moment later, another figure stepped out of the hotel. Daniel's world tilted. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random affair with some unknown man. It was Mark. Mark, his best friend since college. Mark, the man who had stood beside him at his wedding. Mark, the godfather to their son. Lisa laughed at something he said, touching his arm lightly before they parted ways. Daniel sat frozen, his vision tunneling. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a knife straight to the heart. And now, he had to decide what to do with it. Daniel sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his fingers ached. His breathing was shallow, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Mark! Lisa wasn't just cheating, she was cheating with him. The man he had trusted for over a decade. The man who had been there through every milestone in his life. The best man at his wedding. The friend who had once sworn he would always have Daniel's back. Daniel watched as Mark walked to his car, completely oblivious to the burning gaze locked onto him. Lisa had already disappeared down the street, blending into the world as if she hadn't just shattered everything Daniel thought he knew. His phone buzzed again. "Can you pick up some milk on your way home?" Milk. A simple, ordinary request from his wife. As if she hadn't just walked out of a hotel with another man. As if she hadn't just kissed Daniel goodbye this morning with the same lips she had probably used to whisper secrets to Mark. A wave of nausea hit him, and he swallowed hard. His first instinct was to storm after Mark, to drag him out of his car and demand answers. To scream in his face, to make him feel the same betrayal that was now clawing at Daniel's insides. But no, that would be too easy. Lisa and Mark had built their betrayal on deception. Daniel would use the same weapon against them. That night, Daniel walked into their house like nothing had happened. Lisa was in the kitchen, humming softly as she poured herself a glass of wine. She turned and smiled at him like she hadn't spent the afternoon tangled up with someone else. "Hey, babe," she said, walking over to kiss him on the cheek. "Long day?" He forced himself to smile, to wrap his arms around her waist and pull her close. He needed her to believe that nothing was wrong, that he was still the same clueless husband she thought she had fooled. "The usual," he murmured. "You." She let out a small sigh. "Ugh, meetings back to back. I barely had time to breathe." The lie slid off her tongue effortlessly. Daniel kissed her forehead, his stomach turning at the thought of what she had really been doing. He had never been a violent man, never been the type to seek revenge. But as he held his wife in his arms, he realized something. There was no coming back from this. And if his marriage was going to burn, he was going to be the one holding the match. Daniel lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, his mind a battlefield of rage, sorrow, and cold calculation. Lisa slept peacefully beside him, her breathing steady, her Apple Watch still glowing faintly in the dark. She had no idea he knew. No idea that every touch, every sweet word she gave him now felt like acid searing his skin. His thoughts drifted back to Mark. The betrayal from Lisa was crushing. But from Mark, it was unforgivable. The man who had been his best friend, his brother in every way except blood. The man who had held his son in his arms when he was born. And now, that same man was sneaking off to cheap hotels with his wife. Daniel clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe evenly. He couldn't lose control. He had to be smart about this. Lisa and Mark thought they were careful, thought they were clever, but they had no idea who they were up against. The next morning, Daniel played the role of the perfect husband. He kissed Lisa on the forehead before heading to work, asked about her schedule, and even sent her a sweet text, all while tracking her every move. She had gotten careless. The Apple Watch had made it too easy. He watched her workout logs, her heart rate spikes, the addresses that made no sense. By noon, he had a pattern. Mark and Lisa met every Tuesday and Thursday, usually between 2 and 4 p.m. Sometimes a hotel, sometimes Mark's house. His wife was away on business trips often enough that they must have felt safe. It disgusted him, but now he had what he needed. He wasn't going to confront them yet. That would be too simple, too clean. No, he wanted them to feel it, to feel the paranoia, the uncertainty, to feel the world shift beneath their feet just as his had. That evening, he decided to test the waters. Lisa was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, her post-dash meeting ritual. Daniel leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. "Tough day?" he asked casually. Lisa sighed, rolling her shoulders. You have no idea. Meetings were brutal. Lies. He tilted his head, feigning concern. Yeah? Where was it again? I forget. For just a fraction of a second, she hesitated. A flicker of something, fear? Guilt? Crossed her face before she covered it with a soft smile. Oh, just at the firm. You know how it is. Daniel nodded slowly. Of course. He let the silence stretch just a little too long, just enough for her to notice. Then he smiled. Lisa relaxed, sipping her wine, completely unaware that her husband was setting the stage for something far, far worse than a confrontation. Later that night, as Lisa showered, Daniel picked up her phone from the nightstand. She had changed her passcode. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. She was getting nervous. Good. He wasn't just going to catch her. He was going to destroy everything she thought she had. Daniel had always been good at staying calm. It was what made him great at his job, analyzing situations, thinking 3 steps ahead. But this wasn't work. This was his life, his marriage, and it was unraveling in front of him. Lisa had changed her passcode. That meant one thing. She suspected something. Maybe not that he knew, but enough to make her paranoid. Good. Let her feel that creeping anxiety. Let her wonder if her perfect little secret was slipping through her fingers. He wasn't done yet. The next day, Daniel left for work like normal. Kissed Lisa on the cheek. Told her he'd see her later. She smiled, acting like everything was fine. But she checked her phone the second he turned his back. She was nervous. And she should be. Daniel didn't actually go straight to work. Instead, he parked a few blocks away and waited. At exactly 1:45 p.m., Lisa left the house. Right on schedule. He followed at a distance, careful not to get too close. He had studied her routine now, knew the route by heart. He didn't need the Apple Watch notifications anymore. He knew exactly where she was going, and he knew who was waiting for her. By 2:05, she pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel. A few minutes later, another car pulled in. Mark! Daniel's hands tightened around the steering wheel. He watched as Lisa got out, checked her reflection in the window, then walked inside. Mark followed a minute later. Neither of them looked around. They didn't think they needed to. They were wrong. Daniel could have stormed in right then. He could have confronted them in the lobby, demanded answers, made a scene. But that wasn't the plan. He waited. 15 minutes, then 30, then an hour. At 3:30, he got out of his car and walked into the hotel. The receptionist barely looked up, too busy scrolling through her phone. He approached the desk, clearing his throat. Excuse me, I'm here to see a guest. Mark Benson. He said he's in room 214. The woman barely glanced at the screen before nodding. Yes, sir. Room 214. Daniel smiled. Great, thanks. She went back to her phone, unaware that she had just handed him everything he needed. He turned and walked down the hallway, heart pounding. Outside room 214, he paused. He could hear faint voices, laughter, muffled through the door. His fingers itched to knock, to kick the door open, to watch their faces crumble. Instead, he took out his phone, snapped a picture of the room number, and walked away. That night, Lisa came home as if nothing had happened. She kissed him on the cheek, wrapped her arms around him, smiled like she was still the same woman he had married. Daniel smiled back, but deep down, something inside him had turned to ice. She thought she had fooled him, thought she was in control, but she had no idea what was coming. Daniel had never been a vengeful man. He had never believed in mind games, in deceit, in calculated destruction. But betrayal changes a person. It twists them, sharpens them into something unrecognizable. Lisa thought she was safe. She thought she was still in control. She had no idea that every move she made was bringing her closer to the edge of a fall she wouldn't see coming. Daniel was going to make sure of it. The day after he followed Lisa to the hotel, Daniel started laying the groundwork for the final blow. First, he needed leverage. He spent the morning transferring every bit of evidence he had. Screenshots of her Apple Watch messages, heart rate spikes, workout logs, location pings, and now, the undeniable proof. The photo of room 214. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was fact. By lunchtime, he had already sent copies to a secure folder and backed them up to the cloud. If Lisa or Mark thought they could lie their way out of this, They were in for a rude awakening. The next step was psychological. Lisa was good at deception, but Daniel wanted to see how good. He wanted to watch her lie to his face, knowing he held all the answers. That evening, he played his role perfectly. Lisa sat on the couch, sipping her wine, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her. "How was your day?" he asked. Lisa barely looked up. "Exhausting. Non-stop meetings." A slow smile spread across his face. "That's weird." She finally glanced at him. "What is?" Daniel tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "I swung by your office today. Thought I'd surprise you, but they said you weren't in." The glass of wine stopped halfway to her lips. There, that hesitation, that flicker of panic in her eyes before she covered it up. "Oh," she said, laughing lightly. "Yeah, I had a client lunch that ran long, so I just worked remotely after." The lie was smooth, effortless. If he hadn't known the truth, he might have believed her. But he did know the truth. He forced himself to nod. "Makes sense." Lisa relaxed, taking a sip of her wine, completely unaware that she had just failed the first test. Later that night, as Lisa slept, Daniel made his final move. Mark wasn't just his wife's lover. He was also his best friend. And that meant Daniel had access to him in ways Mark hadn't considered. Mark was careless with his passwords. Daniel had helped him set up his home office last year, and in doing so, had seen his login credentials for several accounts, including his personal email. It took less than 2 minutes to gain access, and what Daniel found made his blood boil. Dozens of emails, some explicit, some romantic, some detailing how they had been sneaking around for over a year. Mark wasn't just betraying him. He was mocking him in the process. Daniel closed his laptop, breathing deeply. He had everything he needed now. The question wasn't if he was going to destroy them. It was how. The next morning, Daniel sent a message to Mark. "Dinner at my place tonight? Just us. Need to talk." Mark responded almost instantly. "Of course, man. Everything okay?" Daniel smiled. "Yeah, just need some honesty between friends." By the time the sun set, Mark would have no idea what was waiting for him. And Lisa? Her reckoning was coming next. Mark arrived at Daniel's house just after 7 p.m., looking casual, relaxed, completely unaware that the ground beneath him was about to collapse. "Hey man," Mark said, stepping inside, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. "You okay? You sounded kind of serious in your text." Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah, just needed to clear the air about something." He led Mark into the dining room, where 2 glasses of whiskey were already poured. A small touch, a way to disarm him. Mark took the bait, grabbing the glass and taking a sip. "So, what's up?" Mark asked, leaning back in his chair. Daniel sat down across from him, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his photos, then turned the screen toward Mark. Room 214. Lisa stepping inside, Mark following. For a second, Mark just stared. Then his face went pale. What is this?" Daniel tilted his head. "You tell me." Mark opened his mouth, then shut it. His fingers twitched around the whiskey glass. "Listen, man." Daniel leaned forward, his voice deadly calm. "Don't insult me by lying." Silence. Then, finally, Mark let out a shaky breath, rubbing his face. "I swear, Daniel, I didn't mean..." Daniel slammed his glass onto the table. "Don't. Just don't." Mark flinched but didn't say another word. He knew there was no escape. Daniel stood up, walking toward the kitchen counter where a thick manila envelope sat. He picked it up and tossed it onto the table in front of Mark. "Inside is every message, every call log, every location you and Lisa have met. I have copies backed up. I have proof of every lie you've told me." Mark swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the envelope but not daring to touch it. Daniel folded his arms. "You're going to end it. Tonight. You're going to text Lisa and tell her it's over. And if you ever speak to her again, I send this to your wife, to your boss, to everyone." Mark's jaw clenched, but he knew he had no choice. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, and typed the message under Daniel's watchful eye. A few seconds later, Lisa's reply came through. "Wait, what? What's going on? Call me." Mark looked up at Daniel. "It's done." Daniel nodded. "Now get out." Mark hesitated as if he wanted to say something, But one look at Daniel's face made him think better of it. He grabbed the envelope and walked out, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Lisa came home an hour later, her phone clutched in her hand, a look of panic on her face. "Daniel," she started, her voice frantic. "Something's wrong with Mark. Daniel held up his phone, showing her the same picture he had shown Mark. Her breath caught in her throat. She froze in place. "Don't lie," Daniel said, his voice quiet, deadly. Lisa's lips trembled. Daniel exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "How long?" Tears welled in her eyes. "It's not what you think." He laughed bitterly. "Oh, it's exactly what I think." Lisa reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Daniel, please. I love you." Stop, he interrupted. "You don't get to say that anymore." He turned and walked to the door, opening it wide. "Get out." Lisa blinked. "What? You heard me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Daniel, please. Let's talk about this." "There's nothing left to talk about." Her face crumbled, but he didn't care. He had spent weeks drowning in betrayal, in heartbreak, in rage. Now he felt nothing. Lisa stood frozen, like she thought if she just waited long enough, he'd change his mind. He didn't. "Leave." With a choked sob, she grabbed her bag and walked past him, out into the night. Daniel shut the door behind her, locking it. And just like that, it was over. As he stood alone in the quiet house, he realized something. He wasn't broken. He wasn't shattered. He was free.